Guys, I am very, very excited for this episode of the Ripple Effect podcast because of our guest. He is a legend at ESPN. He's a play by play announcer. His name is Alex Loeb, and I am such a fan of what he does and his support of UT sports and actually sports in general, just in the region. He is very, very good at what he does, whether he's calling a football game, whether he's calling a volleyball game or softball. He kind of does it all, and his knowledge and range and experience in sports is just it's amazing. It's very impressive. And I actually got an opportunity to get him on the show because of a ripple that was started by his wife. Yvonne Nava is his wife, who works for the ABC affiliate here in Austin, KView. She's the morning anchor. I have loved her for years. She has got personality that never ends. I can see why these two really belong together because they really, really complement one another. But I had a great interview with Yvonne, and she said, you ought to meet my husband. I think he would really enjoy the conversation with you. And it took a while, but here we are. And I'm super excited and pumped to have Alex on the Ripple Effect podcast today. So with no further ado, I want to just dive right into this interview because I am totally a fan of this guy, and I can't wait to have the opportunity to sit down and have this conversation. So, no further ado, Alex Loeb, welcome to the Ripple Effect podcast. Alex, thank you so much for joining the Ripple Effect podcast. How are you doing today?
Wonderful. Thanks for having me on. My wife, Yvonne Nava, I know was on, I think last year, and she was
Yep.
raving about you. So excited to be on here, and thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, well, I certainly appreciate her rippling us together to make this happen. I know it's been a long time coming, and I've got to say right off the bat, I am a huge fan of yours. I love your style, I love your approach, and so much like interviewing her, I'm a little bit nervous because you're an actual pro at this. So I'm going to do my best to show up and play with the varsity as best as I can. So
That's one fan, so I'll take it. I appreciate it.
you got lots of fans, I guarantee you. In fact, my oldest son, is a total UT nerd, and I told him that we were doing this interview, and he's like, "Oh, I cannot wait to listen to this episode." So you definitely have more than one, I promise you. But
I hope he's recovered from this past weekend. That was a gut-wrenching loss.
yeah, and you were there, right? You went up to Dallas, and you were part
I
of the
was not. I was watching it at my home in front of a fireplace. We had some,
ah.
so I was comfortable as you could be. But that ending was, I mean, they were 3 feet away from tying it. That was tough.
Yeah, I feel horrible for them. I mean, I don't think we're quite over the loss and sort of the shock of how it just kind of unfolded in those last few minutes. Well, kind of what was your take as to how you saw it kind of unfold? I know that the approach that I think that they did to the play calling, it was just like a little suspect.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting because the first half was kind of like the Penn State Notre Dame game the night
Yep.
before, where one team was dominating. Ohio State was dominating the first half, and you look up and it was still only 7-0. And then Texas ties it up, and you feel like, okay, after getting pretty
Yeah.
badly outplayed for a while, they're right in this. And then that last play happens before the half, the long touchdown run.
Yeah.
And then you feel like Ohio State has the momentum, and it just went back and forth in the second half. But again, I mean, and Sark would tell you the same thing. You can't ask for anything more than first and goal at the one, which is
No.
just a few feet away, and just wasn't meant to be.
Yeah. Yeah. It was painful to watch, but certainly proud of the team, and I feel especially bad for Quinn, obviously, just because that was his former team, and he had something to prove, and it just I don't know if you could script that any better. Your former teammate, strips the ball from you and then runs it back for 6. I know that has to hurt him a lot, but also there's maybe a little bit of pride and ownership there from if it's going to be somebody, it might as well be a guy I know really well, right?
Yeah, and Quinn is such a nice guy behind the scenes, just super humble, really likable. So you had to feel for him. But it is interesting after covering this team for all these years. it appears at least the LHN curse is over because from the moment we took over, I mean, the team, it was a roller coaster,
Yep.
different eras of coaches and athletic directors coming in. And now all of a sudden, the team consistently making it to the college football playoff semifinals and hopefully further next year.
Yeah. I mean, it feels like we're making all the right steps, taking all the, the right momentum into the future. And
Yeah.
certainly you couldn't ask for a better season for the start of SEC conference play.
And Arch is legit. I mean, from the moment he stepped on campus, I remember standing next to him. It was crazy how big he was for a
Yep.
freshman, even back then. Like, he is a big dude. And then you match how fast he is. He runs like his grandfather, like Archie did with the Saints.
Yep.
But in his brief appearances throwing the ball, obviously he has shown off some talent like Eli and Peyton. So we'll see. I mean, you talk about expectations. I'm trying to think of, did Vince have these expectations when he arrived on campus? Because these are as high as any Texas quarterback has had as far as expectations are concerned in program history.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think any of them actually had that Colt Vince. I mean, there was hope. You always hope with every new starting quarterback that they're going to be, they're going to be the right fit and they're going to be able to lead the team. But coming in A with the name on the back of the jersey and B just how Texas was looked at for landing him as a recruit and then basically having him sit for 2 seasons while he's sort of learning what he can under Quinn. I'm fearful for next season, to be honest, because I think at the end of the day, that's a ton coming into the new season to take on that responsibility.
Well, now you become a victim of your own standards, your
Yep.
own expectations. Where now I would think Texas fans are thinking, okay, 2 straight trips to the semifinals, it's championship or bust
Yep.
next year, the next 2 years. So now the bar has been raised. It's like when Max started winning, really winning every
Yep.
year. I mean, anything less than a title or in the title game was kind of a disappointment.
I agree. I am still personally in shock that UT let him go. Even we had those couple of rough years right after the national championship, and we couldn't quite find our footing. But to arrive at a decision to let Mac Brown go as a coach, I still am still kind of shocked by that. But then all the preceding years, obviously with Charlie and Tom, and then obviously now landing on Sark, who seems like the absolute perfect fit for the program. But do you think we would have, in your opinion, based on what you knew about the teams and sort of the approach that we had in terms of culture, do you think we would have eventually figured that out with Mac had they given him more time, or do you think that the changes were inevitable and needed to happen?
I once heard a coach say after about 15 years, after a decade to 15 years, no matter how great of a coach you are, your message kind of gets lost.
Yeah.
So whether it's Bill Belichick or whether even now with the Steelers, Mike
Yeah,
Tomlin,
Tomlin.
great coach, but the team, I just think it was Mac's time, and he looked refreshed after taking a break doing broadcasting and then going to North Carolina. Then obviously, now they parted ways, but I think it was time, and you rarely replace a legend with a legend, as Alabama's finding out. So
That's right.
coaches, but now, Texas has seemed to be in pretty good shape with Sark.
Absolutely. I agree. I think the future is super, super bright. I would love to learn just for the sake of the audience, like what got you into this? I mean, obviously I've seen your background and experience. You start off as sportscaster, you went into radio, and then you became play by play for ESPN, which has to be, I think, for your industry landing the dream job. How did that all evolve? And was this something you always wanted to do as a young person?
I have kind of a different backstory from everybody else. I mean, I always loved sports growing up. I grew up in the DC area, so we were big. Now they're the Washington
Yep.
Commanders fans, and Washington Capitals and Baltimore Orioles back then. So diehard sports fan, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I was kind of lost in high school, wasn't getting great grades. So I didn't go to college right away. My parents, thank God, found an internship program based out of Massachusetts where
Cool.
if you're not quite ready for college, you start off doing a 2 week outward bound. And then throughout the rest of what would be an academic year from September through May, you try different internships, working at different jobs to try and find out what you're passionate about. So One of my internships was at a newspaper. That was okay. One was at a theater where they did a lot of acting and everything. That was different. And my last internship there was at a radio station, and they let me do mock broadcasts.
Oh,
And when
wow.
I got to do that, that's kind of when the light bulb went off, and I was like, "Oh, this is what I want to do. Like, I definitely want to give this a shot." So after that off year, then I had the desire to go to college and everything, and I ended up applying and getting into the University of Miami. And there, not only did they have a great broadcasting program, the opportunities they had were unbelievable. So for my college time there, I got to broadcast Miami Hurricanes football, basketball, baseball, traveling with the teams. It was just an unreal experience.
So what's the one thing that the average fan doesn't know about the type of job that you have today, right? Are there any uh, things that would surprise the average fan about the effort and work and preparation that goes into what you do on game day?
Yeah, they probably don't realize the amount of, and it's an amazing job. It's not construction or manual labor, but the amount of work that goes into it behind the scenes when it's not the day of the game. The constant days of preparation and studying and going over research. So it's not just, you're not just working for one day, you are working the rest of the week so that when the time for the broadcast comes, that should be the easy part. Like, certainly not an athlete. That's why I talk about sports. But you hear athletes say the preparation you put in through the week should show up on Sunday or Saturday, whatever it is. And it's kind of the same thing. If you've done your prep, then the broadcast should be fine. But you have to do a ton of prep going into it.
Yeah, I think as an average fan, you just kind of see it show up on your television or you're hearing it on radio, and it just feels like it just flows like it's all natural. But I know for a fact, obviously, just have got a couple of connections in the industry, how much effort goes into making it feel so seamless.
It
But
should.
a
And
lot of that work falls on you, right? I mean, you're doing much of that preparation, and whoever's organizing the broadcast, they're obviously handling it, but the content that you actually have to create in order to have that conversation with the viewer for 3.5, sometimes 4 hours, has got to be astronomical.
yeah, and the balance really for a lot of us is not to over prepare because you look down when it's time for tip off or kickoff or whatever, and it's like a beautiful mind. You have notes everywhere, words scroll. You can't even read your handwriting half the time.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what I'm working with now, trying to balance it out where it's the most important nuggets, the most important facts you want to focus on. Oh, but yeah, there's just a ton of preparation and research and all that the viewers never see, nor should they. I mean, they don't need to know how the sausage is made, like in any business. It should come across as a smooth broadcast because you prepared so much.
What's the thing that's surprised you the most along this career path that really kind of stands out even to you at this stage of your career?
Uh, well, two things. You do get moments where you pinch yourself, like, "Wow, this is what I wanted to do 30 years ago," and
Yeah.
I'm getting paid for it, and I'm so thankful for that. And the other thing is that kind of surprised me is how helpful people have been along the way in the same business. Because when you're first starting off, you're just fighting for your role. You're trying to climb the ladder. You view everybody as competition.
Yeah.
And then the older you get, you realize people are helping you along the way, and you need to do the same.
Yeah.
Because the people you meet along the way up, you will inevitably meet along the way down or somewhere along the path. But just how helpful people have been, it's been really impressive.
That's awesome. I love that. With Texas moving to the SEC network, I know you were a big part of the Longhorn network, and because of the conference restrictions, ESPN had to do away with that channel. How has that process been? Is that something, kind of, was it a big shift for you on a day-to-day basis, or it's just a different arena in which you're actually broadcasting now?
Fortunately, it's been a smooth transition for me. So now I solely work for ESPN, covering games around the country wherever they need me to, and some are Texas games, but some aren't. Which to
Yep.
me is it's a great balance. It keeps things interesting, But before I moved down here, I worked for ESPN up in Bristol in Connecticut. So
Oh, at the mothership. Yeah,
yeah,
that's awesome.
yeah, a little bit colder up there.
Yeah,
So
just a fuzz.
we moved down to Austin about 2012. So it's now more back to covering, a wider base of teams.
Yeah. So
But
you
it's super
so you
fun.
you travel all over for these games then.
Yeah, I do. Yeah. So last weekend, or a few weeks ago, I was in Missouri. Last week was up in Denton covering North Texas. Be doing a Texas game in a few weeks and then heading to Colorado after that. So yeah, kind of depends.
So you're not just necessarily limited to the SEC coverage. You could be anywhere doing
No,
any
it's just
sport.
now working for ESPN and some is SEC.
Sure. That's awesome. Have you ever been to I have to ask selfishly to the pit in Albuquerque?
No, I was just at the Super Pit in Denton, and I drove
Okay.
back at like 2 in the morning to escape from the
The ice
impending
storm.
snowstorm. But I have not been to Albuquerque yet.
Well, hopefully someday you'll get an opportunity to do that. They're not on. So the University of New Mexico is my alma mater, but lived here long enough. UT's my adopted team, and my son went there. Yeah, it's one of the coolest arenas ever. I think it's listed number 13 in all the top 25 most difficult places to play in any sporting venue.
I do love that's what I love the most about college sports because I covered local TV, a lot of pro sports teams in Miami, and before that back in Texas as well. But I just love the college environment. Just there's it sounds cliche, but kind of an innocence to it and a purity
Yep.
where it just feels different.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you feel like you're just closer because you're seeing potentially the superstars of tomorrow, right? But at the end of the day, you also see a lot of great kids and athletes that come through these programs that once their senior year is done, it's done. They're on into the real world, but they'll remember the fact that you mentioned them on a broadcaster that you brought some notoriety to them, some pride of ownership in what they're doing to their friends and family back home. I think that's
Yeah,
pretty cool.
when we get the chance to interview them and you realize they're just a kid, they've never been through this process before, they're not jaded or cynical or anything by whether it's their job in sports or our job, the sports media. So it's definitely refreshing.
Yeah, that's awesome. I guess one of the questions that I had for you was, as far as the approach that you take to working, because I know you do pretty much any of the sports, but I mean, you seem to be centralized around a few cores. Do you have a preference of one versus the other, or do you just like, hey, whatever the assignment is, I'll take it?
No, I think it keeps it interesting for me in my ADD mind. Like it's always something new, whether it's volleyball, basketball, men's basketball, women's basketball, softball, whatever they ask of me. Was anchoring Big 12 media days at the beginning of the basketball season. Did some radio for ESPN, so it all kind of keeps it new feeling.
Oh, that's awesome. What's the thing that you're most looking forward to for 2025?
Hmm, that's a good question. I'm first of all super grateful the way things worked out post Longhorn Network because a lot of us weren't sure what was going to happen, to be honest. So, really thankful for that matter. But just to keep improving, I know some people when they get to a certain point in their life, they're just fine with being where they're at. But I'm just constantly trying to improve at my craft and I think that's another thing people who, if they're interested in getting in this business, a lot of people hate to go back and watch their work because it's uncomfortable to see yourself or hear your own voice. But to me, that is the best way to get better and really judge yourself and be harsh on yourself and critique yourself. So just try to continue doing that to get better and just constantly improve.
I am curious for those because we probably have a few people that will listen to this episode and be inspired or motivated to learn more about that as a career path. How much training and effort did you get once you landed, sort of at a big employer like ESPN? Do they got, I mean, what's that onboarding process like? How do they get you trained up so that they know you are ready for air based on their standards?
That's a good. Well, there's an audition at first, which was back. I think my audition was back in 2007 or eight. You go through that, and you go through the different testing of sports knowledge and everything. And then once you're on the air there, I mean, I'm always in search of feedback, and especially the older you get, because you never know. Some people just in life will
Yeah,
just want to tell you what they think you want to hear, and it can be hard to get feedback because some people can take it personally. But
sure.
to me, at my age, just be honest, just be brutally honest. So I'm always in search of feedback and trying to find out what I can do better. And it's also a very subjective business. It comes down to one person's opinion. I remember uh, my wife Yvonne and I met at our first market in San Angelo, Texas, 20 years ago, 23 years ago, which was market 190 something. And we had one boss who liked people with a certain hair color. You never know. It's super subjective. So you try
Sure.
to sift through that and find the really good advice you can work on to make yourself better. And some great advice I recently found was from Rick Rubin, the
Yeah.
legendary music producer. And he said, it may sound counterintuitive. You put the audience last. You do what fulfills yourself, what gets you excited over, in my field, over a broadcast. What makes you passionate to do it? And if you're passionate and excited and genuinely, thrilled about it, that will translate to the audience. They'll feel that. But if you put the audience first and you try to perform for them or do stuff for them and you're not being yourself, it won't come across as authentic and
Yeah.
you won't enjoy it. Like just the viewer can sense when you're being real. They can sense when a broadcaster is hokey, when it's fake. And I think certainly for early on in my career, I would try to make certain bosses happy or what I thought they wanted to see out of me.
Yeah.
And even if it worked for a little bit, deep down inside, you're not fulfilled. You're not doing what's authentic to you. So you really have to do that. Because at the end of the day, you just have to trust the audience will sense when
Yep.
you're excited about something.
Well, I think a really good takeaway there, right, is that advice that we've often probably heard, and no matter what career path, you kind of fake it till you make it. But in broadcasting, you just can't do that. I think that, like you said, it'll come across, or you kind of get found out, and then what are you left with, right? So
I mean,
building your
at first, yeah, sorry to interrupt
no
you.
problem. No,
There is some truth to that early on. When you're starting off like me in San Angelo, you do kind of fake it till you make it to a certain level. But then once you make it there, you have to trust in yourself enough to know there's a reason I got here. Let me just trust my instincts. I don't need approval from every single person here and there. Sooner or later, I just have to go with why I got in this business, what makes me excited, and hope the audience will appreciate that. The more eyes that are on you, it's just human nature to care about what they're thinking, especially with social media. And there comes a point where you have to turn it off or you'll lose your mind because for everybody who says they like you or great job, there's going to be somebody who says you're terrible or you stink or whatever. I mean, it's just, when I first started in radio here in Austin a decade ago, when we first moved here, we had a text line and some of the comments on there were great and some were just, I can't even repeat. They were just awful. I had to go, you have to pretend like you don't see it, but you're human. So
yeah.
you have to reach a point where you kind of don't base your happiness off that.
Well, I was just going to ask you how you balance that with social media, and it sounds like you have to really kind of put on the filter and kind of temper the expectations there, because it seems like, especially anymore, anybody behind a keyboard or their thumb pad can throw out their opinion like they're the expert as to whether you're doing a good job, bad job, made a good call, bad call, and it's incredibly dispiriting, I think, if you get sucked into both too much praise as well as too much criticism.
Yeah, I think it can be the loud minority that you see on social media. So for my job, I have to be on social media and it can be entertaining, but I have to limit it or not read the comments because I'm sure some of them are bots, and some of them even it's real people. I've also found that if somebody says something snarky and you do respond, they're like, "Oh, hey, thanks for responding." They just want to get your attention. but now I'll mostly, to be honest, just try to limit it because it can be really unhealthy
Yeah.
depending on your mindset. And especially even I talk about it with coaches, some of the athletes I cover, they're college kids, and it's the coach can't tell them to stay off social media. But I mean, I'm way older, and even now I wrestle with, having to turn it off. If you're
Yep.
a teenager, that's I can't. I mean, I sound really old saying it, but I can't imagine going through that. And I've been told by a number of coaches at prominent programs that it has really harmed some kids' mental health, and they go through periods where, of course, we're not going to talk about it on the air. But if a player is struggling, we're not going to say it, but they're dealing with some personal stuff behind the scenes, and a fair amount of times it's due to that the feedback on social media.
Yeah, I mean, kind of going back to Texas, right? If you think about all the criticism that Ewers got all season, right? For the last 2 years, really, in all honesty. And then I loved somebody asked him a question, I think, before before the Arizona State game about, the supposedly the $6 million, hey, move to a different program, the NIL money, you'll make more than you would as a rookie in the NFL. And he said, hey, look, I don't look at any of that stuff and I really don't put any stock in it. I'm 100% committed and focused to, what I need to do to be the best, quarterback and leader of the team. And um, do you, do you sense a lot of times that that is actually true, that these guys like Quinn are hey, know there's a lot of noise, good and bad, probably a lot of bad when we don't win. Do you think that he's got the capacity to kind of turn that off and legitimately just focus on what's in front of him?
His personality does, not
Yeah.
every can, but this just going through all this is such a great thing for him later on in life because,
Yep.
like, maturity wise, I can't imagine at his age being able to deal with any of that. I mean, I was a wreck at that
Yeah.
age. I don't know how he does it. So there, a lot of the kids are having to mature a lot faster because there's just cameras and microphones in their faces constantly, and now it's their brand. Like, you could lose money based off that with NIL. And then just scouts looking at how they handle that for the future, especially at that position, the quarterback. That is important. Your poise, how you handle that, because you don't want someone who doesn't know how to handle the pressure. But for Quinn, yeah, I mean, he his expectations coming in, I mean, that's just part of the deal, but they were insane.
Yeah. I got to think Sark does a great job, and the coaching staff, and of course all the support staff for UT, all their sports, but specifically football, because there's such a high profile target on that team all the time. But I would guess they probably have some efforts towards helping educate these young men as they come into the program to help them figure out how to deal with that. Because just having somebody who just tells you really aren't good, or you shouldn't be the starter, or you screwed up a play and you cost us the season, or whatever it is. I mean, I just feel for those kids every single time, because I can see it because of age and experience about the keyboard warriors, but I don't know how young people necessarily do. So do you know if UT actually creates that kind of support system for those athletes?
Well, I know they have SID, sports information directors, who help
Yeah.
coach them up on how to deal with all that and deal with the media and deal with everything. Because for as many highlight reel plays as you're going to have, and it's human nature to want approval,
Yep.
there's always going to be that moment where it goes the other way. So it's hard, again, at that age to, you want that. You want to be the fan favorite, but sooner or later, something's going to happen where they'll get down on you a little bit. So it's definitely an interesting time. I mean, I don't envy the position they're in. I know they're getting paid, but there's a lot maturity wise and mentality wise, and a lot, again, we can't really talk about on the air, but you hear stories about how kids are dealing with social media now, having this money when they weren't prepared to deal with it
Yeah.
growing up. It's definitely different.
I kind of wish the NIL system would have. I think it's great that they are able to create an avenue and a pathway for some form of revenue sharing or revenue generation for themselves. I wish that that money wasn't readily available, though. I think that if you let those kids go all the way through, you actually graduate, right? And you get a degree, then it sits in a trust until some later point when you've sort of had the opportunity to kind of, absorb what's going on in life and you understand how to make smarter financial decisions. I've heard a number of stories. I've got a friend that's involved in a little bit of the sports industry, and the kids are, they're looking for the next big deal and they want to move on to the next one because they want to, absorb as many brand deals or content opportunities as they possibly can, but that's not always good for them either.
Yeah, as much as the programs put into the money into hiring coaches, into the game day environment, the stadium, all the money they pour in, these programs should pour just as much money into financial training and literacy
Yeah,
for these kids, because they are, I mean, just to me growing up, I always tell my kids the two most important things in life. To me, they don't really teach you growing up, at least in middle school, in high school, is again financial literacy, how to handle your money, and networking, because those are two of the most important things in life. It's not what you know; it's who you know,
very
and
true.
that is more important than what you know. And they don't teach that. And then how to manage your money. And the same goes for these kids. And it'll be interesting to see now if coaches' salaries level off and maybe come down a little bit, because now you see some coaches at major programs around the country pleading with their fan base to donate money to NIL when the fans already have to pay for tickets, concessions. So now it'll be interesting to see if they take some money out of coaches' salaries and possibly that goes towards NIL. But definitely these kids need to be taught. Again, you hear stories about how they're spending money, and I would probably do the same thing, just throwing it away at that age in college. But yeah, financial literacy is definitely key.
What do you think of, as it relates to, and I've only got to assume that it's got to be tied into the NIL deal, but I think Iowa State was one of the first programs to actually start, either Iowa State or Nebraska, one of the two I had heard that was actually now charging a convenience fee on top of tickets, right? To sort of go into this student fund, but nobody seems to have an understanding of how that fund gets distributed. So do you think that's going to become sort of a standard across the board for college sports? And will it make tickets even more unobtainable and out of financial reach for a lot of people?
I was just having this conversation with my dad and a few buddies too, how I was looking to take my son to the game the other night, the Texas game up at Jerry World for the
Yeah.
college football playoff semifinal. And the least expensive ticket in the nosebleeds, highest row in the stadium, right below the roof, was after taxes and fees and everything, more than $400 a ticket.
Yeah, it's nuts.
I didn't end up going, and it wasn't that way when I was a kid. It wasn't that way a decade or two ago. So, and I heard the average price for the national championship game for a ticket will be more than $1,200.
Yeah.
And it didn't used to be that way. And to me, that's like, and I'm in the business, that's unaffordable.
Yeah.
I guess people are paying it because they can charge that, but I'm not paying it.
No.
It just seems insane to me.
Yeah, it feels like it's out of control for sure, and only potentially gets worse. I think kind of part of that player fee or whatever they're calling it, player convenience fee that they're talking about, rolling out into some programs, that adds another 10 to 20% in terms of the ticket cost that's already elevated. So I don't know. It feels like everything in the world kind of has gone this way, right? Whether it's cars or whether it's houses, and
Groceries, everything's more.
yeah, somehow we sort of, if we're really motivated enough, we learn how to pay for it. But it's not like you could do it over and over again. Where, I think about, my two boys are, well into their 20s now, but it's like, if I was really trying to get them back into sports and really wanted to get them excited about a particular sport, whether it's collegiate or pros, it's almost impossible to do that maybe but once a year. And that's, that's sad, I think.
Yeah, I mean, my kids, they're sports fans, but I'm kind of glad they're not diehard sports fans because they're not begging to go to the games. Like when I
Yeah.
was growing up, again, in the DC area, I mean, my dad was able to take me to the 1987 NFC Championship games, where the
Oh,
championship game where Washington at the last second beat the Minnesota Vikings, knocked down a pass at the goal line. I still remember that like it was yesterday, and we had really good seats, and they were not expensive.
yep.
That was in the 80s, and now I wouldn't be able to afford that. So, yeah, it's just sports has become so huge. Ticket prices are just nuts.
Yeah, that is. So for that game, the NFC Championship, that was a Joe Theismann year, right?
No, that was when they went to the Super Bowl and ended up beating the Broncos. That was Doug Williams and
Doug,
Chase,
yeah.
where I remember old RFK Stadium in DC, and the stands would literally shake, and it was Wade Wilson driving the Vikings down the field, and last play of the game it was a pass intended for Darren Nelson. I think Darrell Green hit him right as he was trying to catch it, but that memory, as you can tell, seared into my brain. And it was moments like that that helped me want to get into the business.
Sure.
Go to Orioles games and Washington Capitals, and the ticket prices weren't nearly what they are now. So, I mean, fortunately, like the sport of football is the most TV friendly, where you can get much better views at home than you can
Yeah.
go into the stands. But it's funny I worked for LHN for a decade, and my oldest son wasn't really into football. And the very last game I took him to, Texas had the drone show
Yep.
going, like a rock concert. So now he's like, "Well, when do we go into the next game?" And I'm like, "It's over. Like, where were you the last decade? That ship has sailed." So we'll pick and choose when we go to a game, but it's pretty interesting now.
Yeah, well, I think, it's kind of interesting that you sort of share this because I naturally would assume like you're you're Mr. UT, you could get into anything and everything. So it's like I was thinking you probably have to, you know, beat people off with a stick when there's a big game coming because you're like, no, I've only got a select few of tickets that I can
I
buy.
haven't asked since Longhorn Network went away. I guess I could, I'm sure, but I haven't gone back. I've covered a few games, but haven't gone back as a fan. So I'll try to pull that card. Thanks for reminding me next time my kids are
That's
asking.
awesome. I love it. When you think about sort of the career trajectory that you've been on, what is your favorite form of media? Is it, on TV or is it radio? Is it writing about it? Is it sharing it on social? What's the most comfortable for you? Because I got to say, listening to you and watching you, I feel like honestly, it's like having a guy that you're having a beer with just talking about the game. And
Good.
you do that exceptionally well.
No, I appreciate it. I mean, play by play is definitely, that was like my first love, which is what I'm doing now. So I'm grateful for that. And that's the goal, to just make it seem like we're all just kind of hanging out and talking. And you never want to sound like you're smarter than the viewer, because I'm certainly not. It's probably the opposite. So I just try to do my best. But yeah, they're all different. Like, to get in this business, I still think you have to be a really good writer, because I started off, my first job was as a local news anchor in San Angelo, the sports director, and you have to write and edit and shoot and all your own stuff. But writing is key. And I feel like most sports people who are pretty good in this business and who have been around for a while are good writers. Working in radio is fun, a totally different animal, because it's almost like it's very cathartic.
Yeah.
Like you're talking to a therapist for a few hours a day. You can get everything off your chest, say what you want. But that's totally different. Where play by play, you want to like hone it back, or take it back a little bit, and just kind of, it's the opposite. TV play by play is so different from radio play by play,
Oh, interesting. Okay.
because TV play by play, you can see everything. So there's no need to describe a good chunk of what you're seeing, because the
It's true.
viewer, you're
It's seeing it.
numbing
Yeah.
things down. You just kind of want to pepper it with little exclamation points. And really, to me, in TV play by play, the star is the analyst, because they're seeing things most of us don't see, the X's and O's or the details. So it's their job to explain that to the viewer and be able to translate it in a viewer friendly manner. Where in radio, it's really the play by play's job to explain everything and paint the picture, obviously, because you can't see anything. And it took a while for me to learn that. When I first started off doing TV play by play, over describing everything. And you, again, just want to pepper points here and there because the viewer sees everything.
Yeah. Oh, that's I'm glad you pointed that out because I would never have thought of that, but it obviously makes sense. You're there to add additional color to what the viewer is seeing on television as opposed to having to really describe it for somebody who's trying to imagine it just based on their ears, right?
Yeah, and TV is just more emphasizing big plays or moments and then letting the analyst do the rest. Um, Even though you're excited and you want to describe everything, it just, that sounds like you're trying too hard. Like you never want to come across as trying hard
Yeah.
TV because the viewer will sense that too. So you just kind of let it be. You emphasize the big plays and let the analyst take care of the rest.
I love that. The um the thing that you said about preparation and continually looking to get better and getting that sort of unfiltered feedback, I really respect and admire it. It shows that you're an expert in your craft and recognize that, you can always get better and always improve. Who in the industry has kind of stood out to you as kind of like your high watermark, like the people that you really looked up to or took a lot of valuable lessons from their approach to what you do?
Somebody who I think has gone through a really interesting transition. I don't know how many people have noticed, and he's talked about it a little, is Joe Buck.
Yeah.
At first, when he first started off, he got a lot of hate in the business. And he has talked about now he was too stiff. He was too nervous about making the perfect call, about worrying about what people thought. And he was a totally different broadcaster 10, 15 years ago. He reached a certain point that you have to, at a certain point in the business, where he stopped caring in a good way what people thought. And now he's super relaxed. He's very funny, sarcastic at times, but
Yeah.
he's just turned into a different person where he doesn't worry about what anybody thinks. And I think that's the goal for any broadcaster, to just, you have to reach a point where you don't, in a good way, don't care. That
Yeah.
people take that the wrong way, where you just, that doesn't mean you don't put the work in or anything, but you're not worried about, it's like the process. You're not worried about the results. You're doing what feels right to you. So I think that takes a lot of guts, because when you know all these people are watching you, naturally you're going to be concerned with what they think about you.
Yeah.
And I think his evolution has been pretty inspiring, where he's like, you know what, I'm not going to worry and going to let the chips, fall where they may. And to me, he's doing his best work ever.
That's awesome. Yeah, I had a few years back actually had seen an article about his sort of his metamorphosis and where he finally figured out like he got up to that next level and he could recognize it himself. His wife would obviously, is also, obviously one of your colleagues at ESPN, right? I think she's been sort of instrumental to that as well. But the thing I really respected was he wanted to like completely challenge himself to figure out how to not be that um I don't remember how he phrased it, but kind of like that robot, the talking headed robot. And when they gave him the opportunity to have his show on, I think, HBO for a period of time, that took him completely into a genre that he wasn't normally accustomed to, right? You're having to interview and you're having to create sort of a creative way to bring whoever the guest was, bring out, what they have inside to present to to this new platform. And I remember him saying that, even though it was a short-lived experience, that experience was instrumental to helping him really refine and sharpen the saw for his skill sets.
And also, I mean, there's already, the higher up you go in the business, the pressure builds. There's already enough pressure.
Yeah.
But being the son of a legendary broadcaster,
Oh, yeah.
his dad, Jack Buck, was one of my favorite broadcasters of all time. I used to listen to, going to sleep at night as a kid, Jack Buck and Hank Stram called Monday Night Football on the radio.
Yep. I remember that. Me too.
His
I did the same.
was
Yep.
incredible, and his dad was really loose and off the cuff. And I think now Joe has become a broadcaster like that, where at first he was trying to be the perfect broadcaster, and everybody starts off. Even my kids say now, "Why do you have like the fake TV, broadcaster voice?" And everybody at first is trying to sound like a broadcaster
Yeah.
and over talking. But yeah, as you get older and the longer you're in this business, you try to get away from that and find more of yourself and become more natural and just not try not to be like the dime a dozen
Yeah.
broadcaster. You don't want to
Yeah.
have that like fake broadcaster voice, even
That,
though we all kind of do.
well, yeah, you definitely have a great voice. I could never see you like actually trying to fake it to be the other type of broadcaster, but your voice it's on par for the legends in the business. I will tell you for sure, and I
For
and I like that perspective, right? Because at the end of the day, I mean, the thing that I think I'm taking away from this is you learn from the experts as best as you can, and you figure out the good things to take from them, and maybe understand the bad things that you don't want to make the same mistakes, or maybe kind of repeat that. But at the same time, you're constantly trying to get better. But the word that kind of really comes through is that authenticity, and that's legitimately what I sense every time that I've seen you on air is you come across as the authentic guy, and like that guy that we're just shooting the bull at the bar and having a beer and talking sports, which is, I think, ideal. I think that was kind of, and I'd be curious to your opinion here. It's kind of an unreasonable expectation to place on Tom Brady from the get go, but just watching his metamorphosis from the first two games all the way to where he is today is it's been pretty impressive.
I think his last playoff game was his best one this
Me
past week.
too.
I mean,
Told my wife the same thing. Yeah,
he was really good. Yeah, and people after one game said, "Oh, he's not the like." Those of us in the business have been doing this for
yeah,
like 30 years, so to judge him, but that's what people do. But you talk about authenticity. I'm a huge music fan, and huge fan of reading up about famous musicians and the most successful ones in their most, how do I put it? Some musicians, like I'm a huge rock fan, even though my
yeah.
kids say nobody listens to that anymore and nobody plays
You and me
guitar.
do. I guarantee you.
But there are musicians who like were big in the 70s and then they have their sellout period in the 80s and the 90s. But when they were at their best, there's an authenticity they have talked about, a number of them, that the listener could tell that they weren't selling out. And I guess my point is, again, whether it's music or TV, the viewer can tell, the listener can tell whether you're being yourself or whether you're trying to be somebody. When everybody starts off in the business, you're imitating who you idolized growing up.
Yep.
But at a certain point, you have to trust in yourself. So yeah, I mean, and some people never do. Some people spend their whole career kind of being themselves, but kind of imitating somebody else and afraid to let go. And in our business, you just kind of, after a while, have to let go because
Yeah.
you never want to seem like you're trying on the air, or again, that you're trying to be the next Joe Buck or whoever, because people will be able to tell. You can
Yeah.
always, you
I
can
love.
tell when somebody's kind of like putting it on a little bit. You can just sense it, There's not, in this era of stats and everything, there's certain things you can't quantify. That's one of those things you can't quantify, but it's there.
Yeah. No, that's a valid point. And I think it's true probably for any industry, right? At the end of the day, the all you have in life is to be your authentic self as best as possible. And there'll be people that like it and people that won't. You hope your bosses like it enough to, want to keep you around, but
Like
sometimes.
Yvonne and I worked with a number of people in Miami who we worked in the movie Anchorman. There were
Oh, I didn't know that.
we worked with some Ron Burgundies who would put on the shtick on the air, and then behind the scenes, it was just madness. So it is. I know sometimes the viewer can't tell, but usually they can. But
Yeah.
this business is interesting. I mean, people will try to fake it. That's for sure.
Well, I mean, really, quite honestly, unless you are in like music or you've got some stage presence, like you're an actor or something, right? You're probably the next closest profession that everybody sticks the microscope to. So it's got to be tough.
Which makes it so hard to like let go and be yourself.
Yeah,
Because I mean, just like any human being, the worst possible scenario would be being yourself and being made fun of or critiqued or being laughed at. But you have to realize, okay, I'm here for a reason. I'm good enough to do this. Let me just trust myself.
Yeah, I love that. Well, speaking of Anchorman, I see behind you is one of those bobbleheads, one of
No,
the
I
guys from Anchorman.
Matthew McConaughey, who we used to interview him a number of times. Longhorn Network, great guy. Nolan Ryan one, and then the other one's Cliff from Cheers, an old reference. But
Cheer! Oh, Cliffy, I love it.
it's to Boston last summer, so we went on an East Coast road trip. So,
Oh,
but
that's
yeah, I got all
awesome.
the mic flags then and everything, and so because now once in a while we'll do Zoom games, so we try to
Yep.
have somewhat professional background.
Oh, it looks really good. I like it. Well,
Appreciate it.
Alex, I could talk to you for hours, but I want to be respectful of your time, and I just
I
appreciate
have
you making.
I have all day.
Don't tell me that. We could be here all day, but
Read the list from Yvonne after I leave this room, so I'll
oh,
stay as long as you want.
that makes sense. I love that. Well, I want to ask you a couple of Ripple connection questions. These are generally questions that are fun to ask and fun to answer, but they give my audience a little bit more insight as to who you are as an individual, if you're okay with that.
Absolutely.
So, what's the sport for you? What are you the biggest fan of?
It kind of depends. It's changed throughout the years. Grew up a big football fan, and then I've tried to do different sports. Was calling ice hockey for a while, which I love. The sport that one of the newest sports to me is volleyball, and it reminds me of hockey, where it's such an amazing live sport. It's so fast paced, so action packed that I'm trying to make sure that now my goal is to that translates through the broadcast, because hockey doesn't always translate on television. So I'm trying to make sure that a sport like volleyball, really trying to make sure the viewer gets a sense of the electricity in the arena when that happens. So I'm always trying to just see what I'm excited about now and just try and work on that.
I love that. You said you put a lot of time and preparation in, no matter what sport you happen to be calling. Are there resources that the average fan who wants to get a little more knowledgeable or experienced, are there resources that you tap into that the average fan could also look at? Do you have any favorites that you do in terms of your research, or sort of kind of uncovering some of the the ongoing interest stories that might be occurring within a particular team, or even just a particular sport?
I mean, there's really three avenues we use, or at least I use right now. The internet's obviously a huge help.
Yep.
ESPN has a stats and research department, so that's another huge help. But also, just going out and talking to the coaches that shoot around, talking to the players, they inevitably provide you stories that you wouldn't have found on the internet or anywhere. It's my first boss, my first news director in 2001 told me, it's like everybody has a story, and it's true. Every person has some interesting nugget in their background growing up. And one broadcaster I recently worked with pulled a player aside at practice, said, "Tell me one thing nobody knows about you," and it works. Like everybody has something interesting, so it's your job as a broadcaster to find out what that is, whether it's from a coach or a player or just, and you may not use it during the broadcast, but at least you have it in
Yeah.
case time does come up. Because that's another thing. You won't use half the stuff you have researched and found. But that's okay. I mean, that's at least you're prepared.
Yeah, I love that. I love that a lot. The If you weren't doing this as a profession right now, what do you think at this stage of your life would you be doing?
I don't know. Maybe I'd be a park ranger or something out in nature. That's what my wife always tells me when I get frustrated in the business. Why don't you go be a forest ranger? I love being outdoors and
Yeah.
stuff like that. So it'd probably be something completely different, something outdoors. But I don't know. I find it, I kind of feel like, and I tell my kids this, everybody is where they're supposed to be at in life. Or I tell
Yeah.
people who are kind of struggling with a career change, you're at where you're supposed to be right now. And if it's time for a change, it will become obvious. There will be a message there. You'll realize it's time to move on. But I don't know. So I think I'm doing what I am for a reason. Uh, I mean, growing up, I would have loved to have been like a rock star musician, but obviously Neither do I. I don't have the look, or rock stars don't have this forehead on them. I don't have the long hair. I dabble in guitar. I'm not very good at it, so
Same. Yep.
I'm just gonna ride this out for as long as I can.
I love it. So, give me your top 3 to 5 bands that you really
Oh
dig.
well, so I'm a huge Aerosmith fan. That Yvonne and I, our
Yeah.
first date was at an Aerosmith
Oh,
concert.
that's awesome.
I once sat fifth row at their concert. So we've met a few members of the band. When Yvonne and I were working in Connecticut, Joe Perry lives in Massachusetts. So Aerosmith was in a hiatus. So he was starting up a band with his sons,
Oh, wow.
Tony and Adrian. So I told Yvonne, I was working at ESPN. She was working for the NBC affiliate there. I was like, hey, why don't we try and interview Joe? Like he lives nearby. So she reached out to his publicist. And sure enough, Joe Perry's publicist said, I don't know if he's going to be able to make it to your station. Would you mind coming over to his house? And I was like, are you freaking kidding me? Like, so I pretended to be her producer or something. So we end up setting this up. We drive through a blinding snowstorm to his house in Duxbury, Massachusetts. And we go in, and his house doubles as his recording studio, the Boneyard.
Oh.
So he's got platinum records on the walls,
Uh,
pictures of him and Jimmy Page,
oh.
guitars lining the walls everywhere. So we go in there, and his sons are there, like nice as can be, so humble. You wouldn't even know they were the kids of rock stars.
That's
So
awesome.
we're waiting and waiting. And after a half hour, he like kind of saunters downstairs, just even at home looking like a rock star and the ripped jeans and everything.
Yeah.
And he just had, now you get why people are rock stars or superstars in
Yeah.
aura about him. I can't explain it. Just a presence. It was like
Yeah.
everything. When he walked in the room, even his kids kind of straightened up. Like I can't put my finger on it. So it was unbelievable. So we do. Well, Yvonne does the interview, and I'm just pretending to be the producer in the background. So we finish it, and I had brought with me like the little nameplate. I have it up on my wall here off my guitar,
Ooh.
and hoping he would sign it. So again, he's a really intimidating presence. So
Yeah.
Ron finishes the interview, they're packing up the lights and everything. And I'm like, I don't remember what I said, hey, Mr. Perry or hey, Joe, probably Mr. Perry, because I was about to, had to use the bathroom. And like, do you mind signing this? And he just stops in his tracks and he stares at me and he's just looking at me like, are you freaking kidding me? And I was about to say, never mind. And he's like, normally I don't do this. And I was like,
Oh.
just a bead of sweat coming
Yeah.
down. He's like, what's your name? And I'm like, Alex. And he goes, okay, here you go. So he personalized it so I couldn't see
Oh.
eBay because I'm sure he's used to so many people asking for his autograph and then they
Yep.
sell it. But I still have that. Yeah, two
That's so cool.
Alex. And then the drummer, Joey Kramer, used to live in Austin or in Georgetown right near here.
Oh, I did not know that. Oh.
Yeah. So years ago, we saw him in the airport coming back in the middle of the night from like a red eye trip. And he was very nice. And I had him on my radio show too at the Horn here when he was promoting his own coffee brand he used to sell for a while, Rock and Roasting Coffee. So,
Oh, yeah, I remember that. I kind of forgot about that. Yeah.
anyway, he's a huge rock fan. So I love reading up about just the industry and what makes these musicians tick. Because certainly, I mean, we're not in their field, but I still like to find out about people who have to go in front of a crowd or a camera and how they deal with pressure. To me, that is a fascination of mine. How you deal with athletes too. I always ask coaches how they deal with big moments, pressure, anxiety, all of that. Because you really have to trick your mind into dealing with it. I read an interview by Bill Hader,
Yep.
used to be on SNL, hilarious. And he would have stage fright before he would go on. He would have crippling anxiety and he would treat it almost as like a pet on his shoulder because it would show up right before he would go on the air. He
Yeah.
would almost have a panic attack. And you can't deny it or ignore it. So he would acknowledge it and almost treat it like, okay, there's the anxiety. I know it's there. I'm acknowledging it. I'll deal with it after the show.
Yep.
Um, I mean, even now, big performers, they admit they get nervous before they go on, and it's, part of the deal.
Yeah. Uh, Yeah, and when you can find the tools to overcome that and or deal with it, I think, it makes those situations more controllable, right? But also, I think, to a certain degree, I remember, I don't know if you ever followed Dan Harris that was on ABC News for a
Oh,
long
yeah.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then
Yeah.
he had that sort of kind of epic thing, kind of froze up on air, just had a panic attack. And he ended up creating a whole kind of industry after he left the media to focus on how to get centered and recognize, he was doing some things in his personal life that was obviously affecting his professional life and needed to make some changes. But the thing that I think I really respected and admired about him is he like really dug in, like, why does this happen? Why is it occurring? Seemed to come out of nowhere and then he couldn't overcome it. Like it becomes like, your Achilles heel. And I just love the fact that he was able to be able to address it, but in such a public way, because I think I'm a public speaker. I've done keynotes. I'd like to say everyone has been a grand slam home run, but I know they're not. And just like you and your preparation, you always learn from something. What worked, that joke didn't land, or that point I thought was going to get like, the amen, and I didn't get anything. It's like you're constantly evolving and adapting. But I think that's, really what real good professionals do. I want to come across as authentic. I want to come across as knowledgeable and experienced, but I also want to make sure that you get what you hoped you were going to get when you showed up.
And it's also, you want to critique yourself, but not bury yourself. So it's
Yeah.
also realizing when something isn't perfect, because it never is. You're always striving for that. It's
Yep.
okay. Like, it's okay if you flub a word or what you think is bad, you go back and watch. No, it really wasn't that bad. It's okay. But it is interesting just working with some star athletes who were at the height of their profession, and then they go on camera when that red light. I remember hearing one star athlete say to another as they were right next to us at the desk right before we went on, they go, when that red light goes on, it's no joke. And you never know. I mean, some people, if you're meant to do it, you're meant to do it. Some people freeze up, and that's okay. Like, I'm not meant to do a lot of more important jobs. Yvonne and I always joke, we read words off a screen for a living, pretty
Yeah.
much. It's an interesting profession.
Yeah. Well, you both do it exceptionally, exceptionally well. I got to ask, obviously, you've got, two really fine young men, that you're raising. What do you hope they end up discovering? You both being in media, are you hoping that they go into media at some point, or do you kind of guide and direct them into something else?
I just want them to go into what they're passionate about. Because I feel like everybody says, "Oh, I don't want them to go into my business. It's not the same." Blah blah blah. But we always tell them, if you can find the right mix of doing something you enjoy, doing something that people will pay you for, doing something that has a benefit to others, you can find that kind of magic combination. That's the key in life, because we've had jobs before and we've been in other markets where we were getting paid more than we ever had before, Yvonne and I, and we were miserable. Um, your job is, you're doing it every day, so you better enjoy it somewhat. Otherwise, you're just going through the motions. So we try to constantly teach them, do something you enjoy. Um, it's one of the most important decisions you can ever make in life.
Absolutely. I mean, we spend 80% of our waking hours at work, right? Which is kind of a sad a sad, reality, but at the end of the day, if you're doing it and you're doing something that you don't love or you don't particularly enjoy, it's going to make those, 80% just drag on. And I'm sure you've seen people in your life and career path as I have, that end up just not being, quite kicking on all cylinders, and how miserable that existence is, because it just carries home, right? It just goes back into your personal life, and you're dreading getting up and doing it again tomorrow.
Yeah, and a lot of people, from my parents' generation, they didn't have that luxury
That's right.
of being able to pursue their dream or try and do what they want to do. So if you're able to, don't put money ahead of that. I mean, unless there are extenuating circumstances, really try to find your passion or at least something you enjoy.
Yeah, I love that. Alex, who played a direct role in helping you become who you are today? Like, do you have a specific hero or someone that you really inspired or motivated you along the way to kind of help you get to where you are today?
That's a really good question. I don't
We can
think
always tell Yvonne it was her, so
well, that's it, right?
Yeah,
That's, of course, I'm being deep, you know what, if I didn't
yeah,
say.
yeah.
I don't think it's just one person. I feel like in life there are just people you come across who are like guardian angels at the right time, whether I was in San Angelo or Miami or Connecticut, just people who appear in your life, kind of steer you in the right direction. And you may not realize it at the time, but looking back, I mean, when I tell people the story with me and Yvonne, I had never even been to Texas in my life. I grew up in outside Washington, D.C., went to college in Miami, Florida. My first job was in San Angelo, Texas. I've never been to Texas. I was driving to Texas. There were tumbleweeds. I was
Yeah.
like, out of the movies. Where am I? We were there for again. She was from Laredo, so we met there. What are the odds? We did long distance
Yep.
for a few years, which is hard enough as it is. That was before
Yep.
Zoom and FaceTime and anything. I ended up taking a leap of faith. Our goal was to get to Miami, Florida. I had been in. She did the smart thing in our business, at least back then. You were supposed to take baby steps, increments. So
Yep.
she went from San Angelo to Lubbock to Knoxville, Tennessee. Whereas I thought it was the greatest thing since sliced bread. Oh, network's going to sweep me up. So I was in San Angelo, Texas, applying only to the biggest markets. 4 years later, I'm still stuck in San Angelo, just working her way up. So she's like, listen, the goal was to get to Miami. It's do or die. So I ended up taking like a part-time job in sports radio, which already doesn't pay anything, but
Yeah.
part-time is nothing. I had an aunt and uncle who lived in South Florida. So I lived with them to save money. I'm working part-time radio and it's paying nothing. So I'm like, I just need a job that has insurance, benefits, all this. It just so happens that an executive producer for the ABC television station in Miami remembered me from being a student at the University of Miami because he used to come to speak to our classes.
Yep.
He's like, "Oh yeah, you were really good. You would ask a lot of questions. You were a really good student." He's like, "Yeah, I'll bring you in for an interview." Because of that connection, who you know, not what you know, he ends up hiring me to become a full-time producer. So I go from being on the air in San Angelo radio to completely off the air, which was not my goal, but full-time benefits and a job.
Yep.
Yvonne's still in Knoxville, Tennessee. So after being there for a few months, I work up the courage to go meet with my news director there, my boss in Miami, and mention, hey, my wife is in Knoxville. She's trying to get a job here as a reporter or an anchor. So I'm sitting in his office telling him this, and he goes, what's her name? I said, Yvonne Nava. And he points to his shelf behind him and he goes, oh, you mean her? And he has a stack of 3 VHS tapes, which is what we used then.
Yeah.
She was among a list of finalists that he had already considered, that he was considering for an opening there. And in our business, that's
That's
the opposite
huge.
happening. He ends up hiring her. She convinces me when she gets down to Miami to try an audition to get back on the air in Miami. So I do apply for that. I do say, hey, I know I'm a producer coming in at 5 a.m, my glasses, unshaven, sweatpants, but I really do on air like sportscasting. Give me a shot. They let me do a mock sportscast and they're like, who is this guy? They're like, put him on the air immediately.
That's
So
awesome.
back on the air in Miami, put me back on the air doing full-time sportscasts. And in Miami, I know this is going on forever, but looking back on it, this is what I mean when I say everything happens for a reason. People
Yep.
guide you along the way. They had us doing hurricane coverage. They had me doing news coverage during the hurricanes. And after a while, I wanted to stop doing news, get back to sports. Yvonne's like, hey, there's a journalism convention coming to Miami. And I'm like, when is it? She's like, it's on a Saturday, 9 a.m. I'm like, I want to sleep in. I don't want to go because I'm an idiot. Wisely convinced us to go. And wouldn't you know it, ESPN had a booth there, gave them my DVD, ended up getting a call back for an audition. and just the rest is history. So just trust that even though you question things at the time that, people come into your life for a reason, that guy who came to visit my class who turned into an executive producer, he remembered me. Yvonne obviously led me in right directions in Connecticut. There were people who I was looking for advice on whether I should move to Austin when this thing called the Longhorn Network was starting up. That was a gamble. So you turn to people for advice. And so throughout my life, looking back on it, there's been some really important people who have helped along the way.
That's awesome. I always call those positive ripples, right? If you were to like line this out kind of like a, sort of a Gantt chart of your life and all the different things and interactions and doors that got open because you had these interactions or, took the chance to have a conversation or, even going back to the Joe Perry story and being just have the guts to ask it, you wouldn't have that thing on your guitar today if you hadn't, right? All these things happen for a reason. So I love that you gave the color to that background in that story because that really it really brings that example home in a big way.
Well, because I'm like everybody, where in day to day life, you take things for granted sometimes, whether it's personally or professionally. Sometimes you get caught up in the grind. And then when I tell a story like that, it reminds me, like, wow, like we're very fortunate.
Very lucky. Yeah.
Wow.
I love that. Well, I just have three last questions for you. This one would be if you had the opportunity to put any words of advice on a billboard that people would see on the way to work and home from school on a regular basis, what would that advice be?
I will say what Yvonne has started saying to me and our kids recently: be comfortable being uncomfortable. It's such an important thing in life.
Yeah.
And I didn't necessarily grow up that way, so it's something I'm still working on. But life is full of pressure situations that you may not want to be in, whether it's work or personal, but situations again that you're not used to, even whether it's pressure at work, whether it's pressure in life, doing something you don't want to do. If you can be okay in those situations, it'll really benefit you in life. And we try to teach my kids, because your kids are different. One of our kids, more like me growing up, I was a big time introvert, didn't want to step outside my comfort zone, didn't want to get uncomfortable. And it took me, again, not going to college at first, getting uncomfortable,
Yeah.
doing an internship program, something that was nobody else was doing at the time. Getting out of my comfort zone to really start making headway in life. Take chances, take risks. Again, don't follow the regular path everybody else does. So get comfortable being uncomfortable. I'm still trying to remind myself of that.
Yeah.
I know so many people don't. They just stick to what everybody thinks they should do, or they try to do what makes their parents happy or their significant other or somebody in their life. But even now with kids, you grow up trying to make sure your kids are comfortable and happy. And then you realize, no, you don't want them to be too comfortable, because that's not going to help them succeed in life. They'll crumble. You will crumble easily if you are not used to being in uncomfortable situations as a child and you enter them as an adult. You're going to struggle.
Yep. That's very true. I think, as you were talking about, I think the fact that because if you're introverted, I'm introverted and shy as well. So, I mean, it's people are not my strength, right? I can do it, and I have gotten better, and I've written a book about how to build better connections and better relationships. And it is my passion to teach people how to do it. Because as an entrepreneur, if you're not good at talking to people, you're not going to be very successful. So you have to figure out the value and the strategy of that. But the thing that I think is comes full circle when I hear your advice on the billboard, that being uncomfortable, you're kind of leaning into that every time you're asking for the feedback and the input. And I love how you said it. It's like, hey, don't sugarcoat it. Just tell me so that I know. Tell me what I want to, don't tell me what I want to hear. Tell me what I need to hear. And I think that's just the mark of a true professional. And I think that's just so admirable.
Well, and I feel like, thank you. I feel like every broadcast, you're kind of putting yourself in an uncomfortable position, especially right before you go on the air. You're kind of thinking, your heart's kind of racing. Sometimes you're like, why did I do this? Why did I
Yeah.
choose profession? I could have been like a forest ranger, like I said earlier, or something. But you're that's when you. Those are the times you really only. Those are the only times in life you learn about yourself.
Yeah.
When you test yourself, when you put yourself in a position you don't want to be in, you will always come out the other side.
Yeah.
And then after a broadcast, inevitably you feel great, and you're like, "That's why I got into this.
Yeah.
That's why I did this." But it's kind of great throwing yourself in the fire, you know, every game and seeing how you handle it. You are testing yourself every night doing that, and it's exhilarating. So I
Yeah.
think it's just so important to test yourself. It just put yourself in a situation where you will find out what you're made of.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah. And when you test your metal and you see what you're capable of, then it just builds on that confidence for the future. So
Because
I think,
what's the worst thing that happens? You find out, okay, I'm not meant to do this. Like
yeah.
it will never be as bad as you think, and it will almost always be better than you thought it would be.
Yep. That's true. So true. Okay. Last two, I promise. When you hear the term, the ripple effect, what does that say to you? What does it mean to you? Or what does it conjure up when you think about those words?
Kind of like karma. Like if you do good things, it'll come back to you, and even if it doesn't, the most to me the most rewarding things I've ever done in life, and I wish I would do more of it, is helping others. Nothing else feels quite as good
Yeah.
as having that ripple effect on others. I could broadcast the best game, go out for the best meal, whatever it is, and it's not the same as helping somebody.
Yep.
So, and I don't know if that's something you realize as you get older, as you realize time's running out. Uh, but it's just so important. And it does, even if you can't see it or quantify it, it does have a positive impact on your life and on everybody else's.
Yep. Without question. That's an excellent, excellent response. So what ripples can I look to create for you?
I don't. I mean, I'm at the point in my life where I'm trying to do that for others. I mean, even now, you doing this, uh, I know is helping others. It gives a platform. No matter who you're interviewing, that people will see if they want to be in that business. Oh, this is what I should do. This is what's important. And that's part of why I wanted to do this as well, to help others. I mean, I still don't feel like I certainly do that enough. So that's definitely something I want to do as I get older.
Well, you definitely helped me out. I'm so grateful for your time and the fact that we can finally put this together. I guarantee you our Ripplers are going to absolutely love this interview and you, and I encourage everybody to to find you. And in fact, actually, probably the best place to start here would be what's the best way for folks that are interested in your work to follow you, social or otherwise.
I still have a cheesy Twitter handle or X handle that somebody came up with like 20 years ago. So at Spanning the Lobe, either on X or on Instagram.
That's not cheesy. That's totally cool. It's on brand. I love it.
It was funny years ago. So yeah, but that's it. Yeah, at Spanning
Okay.
the Lobe, and feel free to DM me or reach out with any kind of questions that I can, try and answer. Because I know it's brutal coming up in the business, in any business, but there's so much competition. And again, my biggest thing is it's who you know. Because when you're applying for jobs, what will separate you? What
Yep.
will, otherwise you're just a name or a number or whatever. You just networking, which wasn't my strong suit growing up, again, and there are a lot of introverts in our business. Once the camera goes off or
Yep.
once this interview ends, I don't want to talk to anybody for a few hours. But networking, just getting out there, is one of the most important things in this business.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. I agree. Well, I am so grateful for the time. I appreciate you and your willingness to do this. I apologize we went a little bit over, but yeah, I mean you're just a phenomenally interesting person to talk to. I hope we can do it again.
And next time we should have Yvonne and myself on together. We've talked about starting a podcast together.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
It would be entertaining. I don't know if it would be beneficial for us, but Yeah, give it a shot. I know she'd be up for it.
We
So
should do it. We should definitely do it. We'll get it planned. I promise. Well, let me
great.
wrap this up by saying, Alex, thank you so much for being on the Ripple Effect podcast. You are absolutely amazing. I'm a huge fan, and I'm so grateful for your time. And for my audience, thanks for tuning into this episode. As you can see, there's a reason I had him on, and we're so grateful for his investment of time with you. And definitely follow him on social. And we'll be back with another episode very soon. But until then, guys, ripple on.